The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to the Jews, I tell you most solemnly, whoever keeps my word will never see death. The Jews said, Now we know for certain that you are possessed. Abraham is dead and the prophets are dead, and yet you say, Whoever keeps my word will never know the taste of death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead? The prophets are dead too. Who are you claiming to be? Jesus answered, If I were to seek my own glory, that would be no glory at all. My glory is conferred by the Father, by the one of whom you say, He is our God. Although you do not know Him, but I know Him. And if I were to say I do not know Him, I should be a liar, as you are liars yourselves. But I do know Him, and I faithfully keep His word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to think that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. The Jews then said, You are not 50 yet, and you have seen Abraham. Jesus replied, I tell you most solemnly, before Abraham ever was, I am. At this they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and left the temple. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My dear brothers and sisters, to understand the Gospel today, we need a bit of background, especially from the first reading, where God makes a covenant with Abraham that he would be a father of many nations. And remember that God made this covenant at a point where where things were really impossible for Abraham. It was really an impossible covenant because Abraham was almost 100. So everything was coming to the end of his life. And God told him you would be most fruitful. It's not only fruitful, but most fruitful. And you would think, you try to imagine that Abraham would be thinking, what can really be fruitful out of me now at almost 100? And of course, when everything is done, there is the fulfillment of that covenant, the fulfillment of that promise in Isaac. So Isaac becomes the child of the promise, the fulfillment of the promise. And this is what Jesus talks about in the gospel today, that Abraham saw, he wanted to see the day of the Lord. He saw it and he rejoiced. What does it mean? That Abraham saw the fulfillment of the promise in Isaac. But remember also that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise of a Savior, the promise that the prophecies that were made in the time of the time of the prophets. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise, is the fulfillment of the prophecies, is the fulfillment of the law. So Isaac in the Old Testament is a symbol of Christ himself, because Isaac is the fulfillment of that covenant, the promise that was made to Abraham. And now we find this encounter continuing, the arguments between Jesus and the Jews. And then the focus is all around Abraham. And this is the first time in the gospel that Jesus speaks bad English. His English is very, very bad, said Daniel, because he says, before Abraham was, I am. It should be before Abraham was, I was. But not before Abraham was, I am. That is very bad English. So, what is the meaning of that? It therefore shows that it's not really what is supposed to be, because I am, again, like I said yesterday, is not to continue, that is not a continuation or the fulfillment or the completion of that statement. But I am, you have to cut it out because it symbolizes the divine name. Remember when Moses was asking God in the book of Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, he says, what am I going to tell the people of Egypt, the Jews in Egypt, the Israelites has sent me? And God said, tell them, I am. Tell them, I am has sent you. So when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, it is not really just bad English, but it's just identifying himself with the divine. Before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, I am God. Before Abraham ever existed, I was. And remember that the promise was fulfilled at a time that was impossible. It was something that was beyond belief, because Abraham knew that it is impossible for him to be fruitful at his age. But that can only be made possible because it is God involved. With God, all things are possible. And this is a statement that we must hold on in our lives at all times, because Jesus, when he begins this gospel, he says that all those who believe in me will never die. And people Jews said, now, are you greater than Abraham who died? But actually what he meant was, those who believe in me are going to experience what I'm going to experience, the power of the resurrection. Because they become a resurrection people. It's not that they are not going to die physically. Remember what Jesus told Martha. Anyone who believes in me will never die. And anyone who believes in me and has died will rise again. So, just to remember, Jesus is the resurrection. How is that possible? It is possible because it is God in charge. And with God, all things are possible. So my dear brothers and sisters, also in life, Abraham was the greatest who went through the difficult moments, the impossible moments, and God making him a promise and saying you are going to be fruitful even at your age. But there are also times that we go through impossible situations that make it so difficult for us to comprehend if we are going to get out of it. But remember, when we turn to God, all things are possible with him. Even the impossible becomes possible. Even the lost cases become hopeful, especially when we keep our minds and our focus on him. Remember the woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years. She had lost hope, but when she found Jesus, everything was restored. Remember Lazarus, who had died and was buried for 4 days. When Jesus said those 3 words, Lazarus, come out, he came out of the grave. Remember the man who was at the pool of Bethsaida and had been there for 38 years and had lost hope. When Jesus encountered him, he restored him to life, because he's the God who makes impossible things possible. So let us continue to turn to him, especially during our difficult moments, especially during our tough moments, and cry out to him. We can only sow the seed. He will make it to germinate at his own time. Let us always turn to him in faith, believing in and hoping that everything will be made possible again.